who is the most underrated cricketer ever?
Jack Callis.
Do you reckon Ricky Ponting's literally just come out and said he's the greatest cricketer
of all
ever?
time,
so he cannot be the most underrated cricketer.
Well, we keep forgetting him. When
Ricky Ponting
did Ponting say he was the best cricketer of all time? Or did he say... Because then he went on to say he's often forgotten. Yeah. I wasn't sure if Ponting actually meant he was the greatest cricketer.
Social media.
I know, but that clip of what... And everyone's seen it. Yeah. When I went back and looked at the podcast, I was like, is that what he's actually saying? Callis is pretty under.
Underrated, I'll give you one from way back.
Yeah.
And it's one of those questions that you get. Who's the cricketer who should have played for England, who didn't play for England? I'll throw two. One fairly modern and one from way back. Don Shepherd of Glamorgan. Well over 2,000 first-class wickets and an average of 16. He didn't play because of Jim Laker and Tony Locke, and so he wouldn't get into the team at that time. And the more recent one, Glenn Chappell. Nearly 1,000 wickets, and he's sort of a nearly test match player. He got in and got injured.
I mean, he's way more talented than many players who've played for England, Glenn Chappell. Well, he's one of the ones that comes instantly to mind to me when someone says, who's the best person not to play test cricket?
So with Glenn, so it's around my era. Dominic Cork, Darren Gough, Angus Fraser, Dean Headley. You're looking at opposition there, you'd say, well, yeah, is he going to get in? Is he, yeah.
So you've just mentioned one of the people that I have always felt doesn't get the credit that he should have.
Darren Gough.
No.
Angus Fraser.
Angus Fraser.
Yeah, I mean, Gus was real steady, reliable, dependable, deadly accurate, wicket-to-wicket bowler. Nipping it back. When I say dependable and reliable, any end, any time, have a good moan. A good moan as a fast bowler. He'd moan at Atherton, who was his best mate. He was...
Do you think he got the credit he deserved?
Yeah, I think he did.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought Graham Thorpe was always one that...
Graham Thorpe, absolutely. And it's a real shame that he, as is the way of the world, that it was him passing that kind of like...
Change the conversation.
Meant, yeah, and I found Graham Thorpe, I mean, I've spoken about him before many times. He was the kind of batter that he always got hard runs, he never got easy runs. His average against Australia, at the absolute peak of Australia power, in a team that was losing, was what, 44?
He just played in a tougher era. If he plays
really tough era.
If he plays 5 or 6 years later, he probably averages high 40s. And
still played 100 tests.
Yeah.
I thought Graham Thorpe was so...
a wonderful player. Brave.
Yeah.
Nothing to say. He did nothing really to say in the changing room or anywhere really. Just got down to business. And when you talk about against Akram and Waugh and Ambrose and Walsh and McGrath and Warne, he's some player.
Can I throw another one in?
Yeah.
Right, we're talking underrated, right? I'm not saying these people are amazing, because if they were, they would be rated. Nathan Bracken.
Yeah, it's funny, I was thought about him the other day, like, he's maybe one of the greatest specialist players of all time.
But no one ever talks about Nathan Bracken.
He doesn't get much credit in Australia because I think he had a lawsuit with Cricket Australia.
He had a bit of a fallout with them, didn't he?
And I remember a lot of the players being really upset because I can't remember if I'd written something positive at that time, and they were like, no, he's causing issues for us. So he really got cut off, I think, from...
Yeah.
But also, I think if you're a white ball specialist, it probably happened to people like James Faulkner and Nick Knight. There were a lot of guys who were white ball. Fairbrother would be another one.
Michael Bevan.
Yeah, what?
Yeah, but I don't think Michael Bevan is...
I think he was correctly rated at the time, but he's underrated now because people go back and look at his record and go, he has a strike rate of 75.
Yeah.
But we remember him winning games when their scores were 215 and no one could hit the ball off the square. He had a strike rate of 75 when no one could score, and he had a strike rate of 75 when everyone was scoring at the other end. Like,
so he's an interesting one because most people's reputation goes up after they stop playing. And Michael Bevan's was so high, and then just kind of he's not really talked about in the same way.
I think Dhoni did the same thing but better, didn't he? Which didn't help.
Yeah, but Dhoni's Dhoni, right? I mean, that's the crazy thing.
No, I get that.
What about Neil Fair? You mentioned Harvey.
I did, but...
You did. I thought Neil Fairbrother, so you get the credit that he's...
I think a lot of those white ball specialists don't get the credit. Chris Harris from New Zealand, I threw him in there as well. I think there's a lot of guys who were good at their jobs, did exactly what you wanted of them.
Adam Hollyoak.
See, I think...
That's a real interest.
I think he was overrated, though.
Do you?
In what, for what?
I just think there was, especially from I'm not English, right? So I saw this from the outsider going,
Yeah.
okay, you guys aren't terrible at the moment, and he's given you some energy, but...
I'm going to say he was a great leader.
Yeah, and I get it.
Yeah.
But you understand from my side, I'm going, well, he doesn't make runs.
From my viewpoint at that time, where you'd go on tour and some lads would be, just in the room, cocooned, and he's out there. We go to Pakistan, he'd go down the markets and take everybody with him. Let's go down the mosque and let's go up to the fort. Let's go down the markets. I've got pictures of him playing street cricket with the locals in Lahore, with Dougie Brown stood around and so on. I think just enlightening yourself, really. And as a leader, he was a really good leader. And the way that he bowled, he wasn't quick by any stretch, but he was clever.
He was an innovator. He bowled the knuckleball.
Knuckleball, split finger ball.
He was well ahead of a lot of people with that.
That was funny when, he was a bruiser as well. He just loved fighting. Oh my goodness.
Well, he became a boxer, didn't he?
He became a boxer, a cage fighter, everything. So it was out in Australia somewhere, and he came out to bat and Warne is bowling. And he stuck his guard and had a look around the field. And Warne is at the end of his 4 or 5 yard run and going, just boxing. That's all he was doing, Warne. Awful.
What about David Boone?
Well respected.
He is well respected, but now he's
become a caricature.
Well, and he's
not really that kind of person either. Like, I think because of the way he looks, people think he's that kind of guy, and he's not even that big of a drinker.
I remember. The 52 cans.
Which isn't true, that story anyway.
Yeah.
But, so I think...
Do you think he gets the credit now that...
No.
You would know from Australia. I'd have thought that he's a real, well-respected cricketer and very affectionately remembered in Australia.
But I don't think he's remembered for being a great cricketer. I think he's more remembered for the moustache and being a little bit tubby and the catches at short leg. Whereas you and I know that he was, for a period of time, one of the best batters in the world.
Yeah, lovely.
Probably before that Sachin Lara, Steve Harmison Ponting sort of thing all happens, right? He was one of the best players in the world.
He's over my dead body sort of player.
Yep.
You've got to prize me out. I ain't giving you nothing. That type of number 3. That's the bloke who you want at number 3.
I think there's a few cricketers from Australia who, like him, Merv Hughes, probably Max Walker would be another one, who kind of become more famous for the caricatures of them than they are for the cricket. Like Merv Hughes came to England with no cartilage left in his knee and destroyed in the 93 Ashes, right? I don't think most cricket fans would remember that. They just remember the mustache and the bad ads that he made in Australia. And Max Walker, someone asked me, a person who knows all about cricket today, have you heard of a guy called Max Walker? And I said, of course I've heard of Max Walker.
Tangled.
He's written more books than Bumble. Do you remember the names of Max Walker's books?
No, I don't.
How to Tame a Crocodile, How to Kiss a Chook, How to Hypnotise a Lion. He's basically the Bumble of Australia, but no one remembers his cricket. So I think sometimes with those sorts of players, they become, and it happens a lot in Australia. Mike Whitney and Max Walker are both very famous in Australia. I'm not sure if the average person who knows who they are knows that they were cricketers.
No.
And that does happen occasionally in Australia. Daryl Cullinan?
Yeah, so like Daryl Cullinan.
He was a great bat.
And
he just couldn't play Warne.
And Ajit Agarkar are 2 players that I probably remembered. So Daryl Cullinan's now remembered because of Shane Warne.
Yep.
And Ajit Agarkar is remembered because of the 7 ducks in a row against Australia.
I think it was 5 because they were called.
Was it 5?
His nickname was Olympic Rings, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Because it was Audi and then it became Olympic Rings.
But yeah, Cullinan is. That's a good shout.
Cullinan, when I was doing the book and we're going through the research, he was the one that popped the most, and you were just like, if he just played Warne normally, and by that I mean average 25 against Warne, his career is probably completely different. He was that good against everyone else. And the minute he got against Warne, obviously it didn't work. And he gets remembered as a joke when actually he's a top, a fantastic player. There's also some of the old guys as well, like Herbert Sutcliffe was obviously one of the highest averages of all time. But at the other end, he's got Jack Hobbs. Jack Hobbs retires and Wally Hammond takes over, and then they're playing against Bradman. Sutcliffe just is almost nothing about his legacy compared to the others. And Ken Barrington was seen as a bit too boring and didn't use his feet to the spinners, and he wasn't as curmudgeonly as Len Hutton. Like, he didn't have that kind of personality. And you're just like, on paper, this looks like he's pretty good. No one ever got this bloke out, and he's not remembered. So I think you can see there are players like that.
Jonathan Trott.
I think Trott's more in the Cullinan mode, isn't he?
Yeah.
He's going to get remembered for the thing at the end, and not the rest of his career.
England could do with a number 3 like him.
Gee, I was looking at that Champions Trophy. Bumble called the Champions Trophy final in 2004. Do you remember? Mm-hmm. There's a moment in that game, and there's a bit of fielding where it's like got hour-long highlights, right? And I was like, geez, that's a good bit of fielding. And I was like, who's this bloke in the covers? I go back. Chris Gale in the covers, diving full length, picked the ball up, turned around, and threw it like he's, I don't know, a very good fielder, right? And I was thinking, everyone is going to remember Chris Gale as this big guy who can't move and just hit sixes. And you know, you look at someone like W.G. Grace, you get remembered sometimes for what happens at the end.
Yeah.
And you're not remembered for how you were for the vast majority of your career. Gale had no hamstring. So I think there's lots of people like that the same thing happens to them in their career. You know, they get remembered for the failure or the thing that they didn't do, whereas actually they're far better than that. But it's whatever the narrative is, right? The narrative kind of leads the way.
I think Darryl Cullinan might be the one. What about like Mark Waugh? What about, he always seemed to not pale into insignificance, and he's a presence in the way that Steve Waugh isn't. So he's kind of changed his, you know, the way he's viewed, because he's still going on national TV talking cricket.
Would you have said he was a great batter?
Mike Waugh?
Yep.
Yeah.
Me too. And his average is what, 41, 42?
Easy. The batting was easy.
And I talked to him about it, and he was, because the question I had, and he couldn't answer it, he's not a great communicator in that way. No, he's not. No. And I was like, what I really wanted to know was how Steve becomes Steve and you become Mark. Because talent-wise, there's no difference. But one person was like, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure I make as many runs. And the other guy, and Mark was really honest, he said, oh yeah, if I got to 100, Jarrod, my job was done. Right? And every other batters in the world is, Brian Lara's like, can I get to 300? Mark Waugh's like, I'm 115, surely I've done my job. Who's next? Is the next bloke ready? And he talked about stuff like that, and you do realise that it didn't drive him the same way, but the actual skill, if you go back, some of the best innings I saw played by an Australian in that era, when they had Ponting and Steve Waugh and Alan Border, were still played by Mark Waugh. But he's not going to get remembered that way. And that is, I think that comes down to average, right? There's so many Australian cricketers who average 50, and Mark Waugh is going to average a lot less than a lot of them.
England cricketers at that time would always say Mike Waugh. They would, Mike Waugh. And another bloke we never mentioned, Damien Martin.
Yeah.
Absolute fixture in that team. Fixture.
Yeah. And that's another guy where the narrative ruined his career, where he played that one bad innings against South Africa when they were chasing 116. Hits the ball to cover after batting all afternoon. And that, even when he got good years later, that narrative of him not being up to the pressure and everything never went away, right?
And then he played 2005 and got sawn off a couple of times. And then 06, 07.
Retired mid-series.
Got out there because he knew they needed to get Michael Clarke in.
Yeah.
So it was all about Michael Clarke and not Damien Martin.
Yeah.
Maybe Damien Martin's...
Damien Martin was a fantastic cricketer as well. There's a lot of like Mike Hendrick type bowlers. Like,
do you know what?
Can I just throw Courtney Walsh in?
No. I don't think so.
He's not in the top 8 West Indian fast bowlers of all time. And look at his career.
No, I think he gets a lot of love.
Yeah, but as a secondary to Ambrose.
No.
And he's a lovely fella.
Do you know what the actual answer is? I think...
You just said it was Cullinan.
No, yeah, but I know, but that...
Before you said it was Cullinan.
It's made me stumble onto it.
Andy Flower.
It is a South African. No, what you said about Mark Waugh, once I got to 100, I've done my job.
We're going back to Jacques Callis then?
No, we're not. We're going back to Barry... Didn't Barry Richards say the same thing?
Yeah.
So that's the answer, because those guys never got to play.
All the South Africans.
All of that the Bite Proctor, Barry Richards...
Well, if you're going to do that...
all those guys.
It's probably Clive Rice, isn't it? Because Clive Rice is the player who should have been a great test player who doesn't play a test at all. At least Barry Richards plays... Barry Richards plays in the Super Tests as well, so we get a little bit of him. We get a little bit of Mike Proctor. Clive Rice is the only one who I don't think played any of those that maybe played some super tests. I can't remember, but no, am I wrong?
No, I think the answer might
It's
be
Clive Rice.
Clive Rice is.
How many times did Clive Rice get you out?
Not a lot.
Yeah. Oh, look, he's like Clive Rice. I had him. He's fine.
Yeah, no, they were a good combo to play against. Hadley and Rice. He'd turn up at Trent Bridge on a real.
Am I wrong? Would Clive Rice not have been a Test great?
Yes, he would.
Yeah.
Yeah, he would.
And he didn't play a Test. Do you know what I don't think there are many other people we could say that about, right?
He's Mike Proctor. He was quick enough, bat nicely, super bloke. You're into them overseas players in English cricket that were a fixture at that county, an absolute fixture. It was wonderful to play against them.
Sounds like he made a few runs against Clive, though, so we might have to scrap him.
Underrated cricketer. The most underrated cricketer then is Clive Rice. Decided.
I wonder if Richard Hadley's not underrated.
Nah,
He's up there, Paddles. He's right up there.
I think his record suggests that he's better than we remember him.
I think he's probably underrated in New Zealand more than he is here.
That actually, do you know what? There's a really interesting one. If you, I think they did I think they went and they talked to people in Sri Lanka about who their best cricketer was of all time, and Murali doesn't win. And you're just
Really?
like, could you imagine? Like it's like Martin Crowe beating Richard Hadley, or Kane Weezer beating Richard Hadley, where you're like, settle down, everyone. We're not saying those guys aren't good. But someone told me that, I think it was Fidel Fernando told me that Kumar beats him. And it was just like, what? Have you guys watched cricket? Like, Kumar's incredible, but Murali. So there are times when you get underrated in your own country, aren't there?
There's a wonderful line from Fred Truman when Richard Hadley went past Fred's 301.
Yeah.
Which you'd think, well done and a great accolade and so on. Fred. Well, no wonder he's got that far. He's been bowling at both ends. Have you seen the rest of them? The rest of them's rubbish.
That's funny because when Kapil Dev goes past Hadley, he goes, oh, he must be tired. They have to bowl him a lot. So it's like every I like that the bowlers are just like, no credit to the guys taking over. Random English name, Jon Snow, I think is a very
you've spoken about him a lot.
He is such a good bowler, and he isn't. No one even talks about him anymore. I think he was a fantastic bowler. He would have got you out for fun.
Yeah, now and again.
Oh, look at him. He's like, Jarrod just keeps picking the guys that I was smashing.
What a bowler. Lovely. 71, Railingworth tour in Australia. That was a good.
Also got attacked by a fan at the SCG.
SCG.
Again, he's more famous for attacking Sunil Gavaskar and getting punched in the head by a fan. Was it hit by a can, whatever it was?
Yeah.
He's more famous for the violence than he is for the actual cricket. He was a poet as well. You'd have all his poetry books.
He was a poet, and his father was a vicar, I think. Yes. Yeah.
There you go. It's still Clive Rice.
Yeah, that's a good shout.